Today on the Fact Hunter channel, we will talk about how the Battle of Britain began. Check out our other videos and subscribe to the channel. As soon as dawn rose, thousands of German airmen began to take their seats in Junkers, Dorniers, Hinkels, Stukas, and Messerschmitts, gathered at airfields in France, Belgium, Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark, supplied with photographs, sketches, and maps of their targets, taken even before the war from the decks of Lufthansa planes flying over England. The Luftwaffe pilots beamed with confidence. It was August 13, 1940, the day the massive attacks on the British Isles began. Led by an air armada of unprecedented numbers and striking power. Across southern England, RAF fighter pilots, alerted by reports from radar stations, sat at the controls of Spitfires and Hurricanes. They hastily took to the air to fly out to meet the approaching waves of Luftwaffe bombers. These fighter pilots were remarkable men, bold, stubborn, and courageous. Just a few years earlier, many of them had made no secret of their decidedly pacifist views. Some had taken the controversial Oxford Oath, vowing never to fight for king and motherland. Now, when the fate of the British Empire weighed in the balance, they stood up to fight without hesitation. Throughout the day, fierce, murderous clashes took place over the English Channel and southern England. Over the following days and nights, German air attacks grew in intensity, escalating into what Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the Battle of Britain. Nearly 500 RAF aircraft were destroyed, and British pilots, engaged in almost non-stop fierce duels, were close to exhaustion. Hundreds of Luftwaffe planes were shot down, but the far more powerful German Air Force was far less affected by the huge losses sustained in this calculatedly devastating campaign. While a handful of RAF pilots were performing acts of heroism in the English skies on an almost hourly basis, on the ground a secret radio listening cell, known simply as Section Y, was doing its best to help combat the incoming waves of Luftwaffe bombers. An important component of Section Y was the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, unit, intercepting conversations between Luftwaffe pilots in the air and at home bases. An important member of this listening cell was Lieutenant Eileen Clayton, who joined the WAAF shortly after the outbreak of war in the fall of 1939. Because she spoke fluent German, she was assigned to an RAF listening station on the south coast of England and became a dedicated contributor to Section Y. At the time, the Y section consisted of English women who had lived in Germany and were well versed in German idioms and colloquial expressions. However, there were few women with such qualifications, so their ranks were soon filled by French, Polish, and Austrian nationals. Working 6-hour shifts, Clayton and the other women of the unit sat with headphones pressed to their ears and tried to catch every word that the pilots of Luftwaffe planes circling over England and the English Channel exchanged among themselves. Their painstaking work was further hampered by atmospheric disturbances, phrases from the pilots' jargon that were not always familiar to them, and differences in German dialects. However, the women of Section Y coped well, and in many cases were able to recognize the voices of individual German pilots and squadron commanders. When the familiar voices went silent for a long time, Clayton and her colleagues would conclude that these pilots had been shot down and were probably killed. On one occasion, Section Y picked up the words "small bolt" and "saloon" on the air. For weeks, these two, undoubtedly code phrases, kept British experts guessing. Eventually, it turned out that the two phrases referred to the techniques by which Luftwaffe night fighters were guided to their targets. RAF bomber groupings. Through persistent efforts, British scientists developed methods to jam the small bolt and saloon. As the war continued, various techniques were tried to extend the range of Section Y listening devices. One of the originators of the idea was Rube Goldberg, the famous American comic book author, who made some effective, though seemingly absurd, improvements. In this case, operators along with listening devices were placed in gondolas, hooked up to observation balloons. However, practice proved that rocking gondolas was the best and fastest way to get the women acutely seasick, so the operators returned to the ground, and the listening devices were henceforth directed by radio. Eileen Clayton and her colleagues in the listening section owed much valuable information to German accuracy. The Luftwaffe divided the area of its aviation operations into sectors. Each had a separate headquarters, responsible for target guidance and safety of aircraft operating in the area. By listening to the crisscrossing radio reports as Luftwaffe bombers and fighters left or entered these sectors, Section Y obtained extremely important information on the range of German radars and the range of specific types of Luftwaffe aircraft. In the greatest turmoil of the Battle of Britain, Clayton and her fellow section members spent countless hours with headphones on their ears, which eventually took a toll on their health. For 2 months, Clayton and other WAAF members were often on duty for 36 out of 48 hours, as they had to make immediate analysis of intercepted German calls so that the RAF could take appropriate countermeasures in advance. After 2 months or so of fierce air battles, the Y section and Ultra Listening Service intercepted an exceptionally important message. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, announced Operation Eagle for September 15, 1940. On that day, the Germans were to launch a massive, decisive attack to finally crush the RAF. If Operation Eagle was successful, Hitler would order the invasion to proceed. If it failed, he would call off the strike across the Channel. On the morning of Eagle Day, the bright blue sky over southern England was covered with a dense network of condensation streaks as 25 squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes attacked the 1,000 bombers and 700 fighters sent by Göring. By nightfall, British pilots had broken the momentum of the Luftwaffe strike. 2 days later, Ultra intercepted and deciphered a report from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, announcing Hitler's decision to halt the invasion. The Battle of Britain was one of the greatest pages in its history. The victory was determined by the courage of the RAF pilots, the information provided by the Ultra Listening Service, and the extraordinary dedication and skill of the little-known women who intercepted enemy calls for Section Y.